In this video I want to talk about 3 different knives. I got the Mora Companion, the Companion HD, and the Mora Bushcraft Black. For this video what I want to do is I want to get into these 3 knives because they're all very similar, but the subtle differences make them kind of tailored toward different users. And so what my hopes are with this video is to be able to kind of compare and contrast some of these in case you're looking at getting one of these 3 knives, so you can kind of see the different reasons why one might be better than the other for you personally. So I'm going to go over each knife briefly, the specifications of each, and also a little bit about what I've observed from my own testing and use of the knife. And then we'll also compare those knives throughout the video to help you see what those exact differences are between the 3. Okay, first up we got the Mora Companion. The overall length is 8.6 inches. The blade length is 4.1 inches at 2 millimeters thick. And the handle material is an ABS plastic. One of the things you're going to see in common with all 3 of these blades is this blade shape. This narrow, kind of slender blade shape with a subtle drop here toward the tip. And because the blade height is not very high, that gives you a nice narrow blade, which lets you get into small places for doing kind of finer work. With that blade thickness of only 2 millimeters, it makes it very slicey. That's the biggest thing you're going to notice with this knife. Very slicey. Great for working, just crafting, light work. I've done heavier things with this too, and I haven't had problems with it. It actually holds up pretty good. Now all 3 of these knives are partial tang knives. The steel of this blade doesn't go all the way through the knife like a full tang knife. It's going to go into kind of a stick and go in partially through there. This blade has a little bit of a flex to it just because it is that thinner blade stock. The handle is very comfortable on this knife. There's only a subtle belly here, a little bit of a drop toward the butt of the knife. And this material here on the plastic has kind of a grippy, almost tacky feel to it, which helps keep your hand secure even when it's wet. So I appreciate that. For being a very simple knife, it's well thought out and it's a good design that just simply works. The sheath on the Mora Companion is a molded plastic. It's got this belt clip on the back. The knife clicks in there with good retention. There's a little bit of a thumb ramp here, which I appreciate because it allows you to one-hand draw that knife. Another thing I like is it's got a drain hole on the bottom, and you'll notice that it's quite a bit of breathing room in that sheath. Now sometimes I like a more compact sheath, like what a Kydex sheath can provide. But what I don't like about those more compact sheaths is when you're dealing with a high carbon steel blade that is prone to corrosion and rust, you don't want to be storing that in a wet sheath. What this allows you to do is it gives you a little bit of breathing room in there, and when you get home to maintain your gear, you can easily rinse out this sheath, just whip the water out of it. There's even enough room that you can stuff a little towel in there and clean that out. That's a lot harder to do with one of those Kydex sheaths. I usually have to let them, sit on the counter and air dry for a while. It's not a huge deal, but it's a nice little feature to have that breathing room inside of a molded sheath like this. It really goes a long ways to helping you maintain and take care of your high carbon steel, especially in a wet environment, in the winter or in rainy, humid areas. Next up is the Mora HD, and as you can see, very similar knife to the Mora Companion. Let's get into the basic specs of this knife, and then I'll talk more about what the differences are and what makes this a heavy-duty version of the Mora Companion. Overall length is 8.7 inches. The blade length is 4.2 inches. We have a blade thickness of 3.2 millimeters. And again, that same ABS plastic on the handle. The Mora Companion HD is designed literally to just be a heavier duty version of the Mora Companion. And they've done that by making the steel a little thicker. For one, we went from 2 millimeters on the Mora Companion to 3.2 millimeters on the heavy-duty version. That's significantly thicker, and you can tell there isn't that bend in the knife, that flex that the Mora Companion has. The Companion HD does have just barely longer blade. You can hardly notice it. The handle is where it starts to vary because the handle on the HD is a little longer. And you'll also notice that when you look at this section of it, it is wider as well. It's a thicker handle. Now all of that translates really well into a heavier duty blade. You have that thicker blade steel. The handle fills out your hand more, which you really don't need the most comfortable handle in the world when you're doing just light tasks. You really don't notice it that much, but when you're doing a lot of heavy duty work, that's where you get hot spots and that kind of thing. So you have now a handle that fills out your hand a little more. There's even a little more pronounced belly on the underside of the blade there. And it, like I say, it is just a little thicker as well as longer too. So they did a good job in making the adjustments needed to turn the classic Mora Companion into a heavier duty blade. One thing that I also appreciated seeing is, if you notice, if you compare the grind height where the Scandinavian grind starts, this first bevel, it starts higher than it did on the Mora Companion. And that's an important feature, because in order to get that same angle, that same edge that we love about the Mora Companion, you have to bring that higher, since this is a much thicker blade. Now, I've seen this attempted with other knife companies that try to take one of their popular selling knives and make either a lighter version or a heavier duty version, and they fail to make the right design changes to translate that into the new knife that they're trying to create. And so then you lose everything that you loved about the knife in the first place. This knife, you do notice it in your cuts that it is a thicker, more robust knife. It isn't as slicey as the Mora Companion, so you do notice those things. But because of the adjustments that they've made in that grind height, as well as adjusting the handle, it is still comfortable and it makes good cuts, good slices. It's still very slicey while being a little more heavy duty. The Mora Companion HD comes with the same, exact same sheath that you see in the Mora Companion, so nothing's different there. All right, last up is the Mora Bushcraft Black. This is one that comes with a higher price point, and so I want to point out the features that this knife has that's different from the Mora Companion, the Mora Companion HD, and hopefully that can help you decide if those extra features are worth it, because for some purposes they're not worth it, and so you don't need to spend the extra money. So let's get into the specs of this knife first. We have an overall length of 9.15 inches and a blade length of 4.3 inches, and that blade is 3.2 millimeters thick, and instead of that ABS plastic like we saw on the other Moras, this is TPE rubber. Okay, so you'll notice that the basic profile of this knife is very similar to the other Moras. We still have that narrow blade shape, same Scandinavian grind, but this is where we differ. First of all, the blade is 4.3 inches, which is a little longer than our other two Mora Companions. Not by much though, so you're not going to notice it a ton, but there is a little bit extra length. Also, we got 3.2 millimeters of thickness. That's the same thickness that we saw in the Companion HD. So you're going to get that same robust blade. Now you'll notice that this blade is black, and what that is a kind of coating. It's called DLC, or diamond-like coating. Once that coating is put on, it's part of the blade, and it's not like a powder coating where it creates extra bulk, which translates to more drag and friction in your cuts. This is right in there, part of the blade. And so far it's held up very well. I don't have any signs of wear on it, which is great. And again, this is a high carbon steel blade, and so I appreciate having that extra protection on there. That is one of the features that you get out of this knife. The handle material, it's even more tacky than the Mora Companions, and it's for the entire length of that, and you really feel that. This is one of the grippiest knives. I did quite a bit of testing with this to see. I put it in water and just felt how that gripped, but I also even put some silty mud and even some freshwater algae, which was super slimy, just to see how that performed, and this one was crazy grippy. Another thing that helped with the grip is this kind of pronounced finger guard. At first I didn't really like that. I don't like a lot interfering with my grip choices and how I use a knife, and I did notice that being kind of in the way a little bit sometimes. But the more I worked with it, I kind of found ways around it. I can still do pinch grips. I can still, you know, I found my way around it. It's not too bad. And what I actually found that I liked about that is that because that's a little more pronounced, when you're dealing with really wet conditions or really slippery conditions, not only is this grippy TPE rubber helping your hand to hang on, but that one digit, that first finger really is able to lock into place there, and it really does help the grip. There's also some little kind of lines here at the back of the blade, and that does kind of add to the grip a little bit. They're up here in the front as well. The other thing that you'll notice that is different about this knife compared to the other two Moras is that we now have a 90-degree spine on this knife. Personally, I really like having a 90-degree spine. It just really adds to the versatility to the knife. I use it quite a bit from scraping tinder off of from wood and bark, really getting those fine shavings off. I use it for, in the desert, I've used it for scraping the needles off of cactus pads when I'm prepping them for food. And then obviously using them on a ferro rod works great. So I really appreciate having that 90-degree spine on there, and that's something you only get on the Bushcraft Black. Also, with regard to the handles on these, with the Companion HD, we got a little longer handle, and we have that exact same length handle on the Bushcraft Black, even though it is a little bit different shape. The sheath for the Bushcraft Black, it's that same molded plastic sheath with the drain hole in the bottom, the breathing space that I like there. The clip is a little different. We got the same clip, but it kind of swivels out and can pop out of there, and you can swap it for a, instead of a clip, it's a loop for threading onto your belt. Just depends on what you prefer there. One thing that I would have liked to see on this is to see that same thumb ramp that we have on the other Moras, just a little thing there that lets you one hand draw that knife so easily. This one does kind of have a traction deal there, but you can't really do it. So personally, for the kind of things that I like in a knife, I actually really appreciate a lot of what the Bushcraft Black has going for it. It is an extra cost, and so depending on what you're doing and what your needs are, you might not need that. Again, your biggest things you're getting with this is a little bit extra grip on the handle. You get that 90-degree spine and that DLC coating to help protect your blade. It's still a partial tang knife, just like the other three, so not a whole lot of difference there. You also get this little bit different shaped handle. And I will say that if you have bigger hands, you might appreciate either the Bushcraft Black or the Companion HD, because they do have that thicker handle that kind of fills your hand out a little more. I wear a size large in gloves, and the Mora Companion works just fine for me. I haven't had a problem with it. I do notice that it's narrower than the HD, but I don't mind it. And part of that might be because the kind of tasks that I'm performing with this kind of thinner knife, it just doesn't need to fill the hand out too much. But I'm getting plenty of grip there, so I'm fine with this. All right, so hopefully it helped to break these three knives down a little bit. If you're just getting into a fixed blade knife and you're looking at one of these, this Mora Companion, being the cheapest, is a good bet in my opinion. It'll handle so much, so most people aren't going to need to step up to that heavy duty. The other thing to think of, like I mentioned before, the Companion HD does have that fuller handle, and so does the Bushcraft Black. So if you tend to use a bigger handle, you'll want to use one of those. And again, you don't lose a ton of the sliciness by going to the Mora HD, even though it is a thicker blade. At some point, I'll probably do some more extensive testing with these knives. I know these are pretty common knives, and most people are familiar with them. So, but I would like to do some tests to really show how much they can do, because sometimes we look at these knives and like, well, those are inexpensive and they're only partial tang, so they can't really do this or that. But the truth is that they're well-made knives and they can handle quite a bit, and we tend to kind of oversell this idea of that we need this billion-dollar knife with amazing super steels, when a $15 knife can sometimes do the trick.